How are ya? How are ya? Whoops. Welcome to Friday night. You've chosen well. My name is Becka Oliver. I'm the Executive Director at the Writers League of Texas, and I am so excited to be here tonight with Amanda Churchill to celebrate her new novel, The Turtle House. Really quickly, a couple things. First, we are live streaming this to some folks, hopefully a lot of folks. So if you happen to be sitting near that camera, maybe so they can hear. What else do I want to tell you? I want to say a big thank you to BookPeople for hosting us tonight. We're so lucky here in Austin to have amazing, amazing independent bookstores, and we at the Writers League love every opportunity we have to hang out in BookPeople, buy books in BookPeople, do events in BookPeople. So thank you very much to the staff and to the folks at BookPeople for having us. Thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. It's a big deal to spend your Friday night with us, so we appreciate it. And so just to tell you a little bit about myself, again, I'm with the Writers League of Texas. We are the largest literary arts organization in Texas. We exist to support writers. Do we have any writers in the room tonight? Why is that funny, Jean? Do we have any people who write but you didn't raise your hand? Yes, we are here for you. This is why you are here, to hang out, to get to that point where you raise your hand. So we put on programs year-round. We do both virtual programs, we do in-person programs. I want to mention really quickly that we have two big programs coming up in Austin in person in the next few weeks. First, on Tuesday, March 5th, we host a reading series every month on the first Tuesday of the month called the One Page Salon. Anyone here ever been to the One Page Salon? If you haven't, you're really missing out. It's super fun. It's a live reading series at Radio Coffee and Beer on Menchac, and it is 5 readers reading one page. So you know, like sometimes you get a reading, it goes on for quite a while. One page from a work in progress. So you get to hear from writers that you admire, from some people you've never heard of who are getting on a stage for the first time. So we'll be there this Tuesday night, March 5th. Amanda Churchill will be reading, along with 4 other writers. And then we're going to be back here in this space in BookPeople March 21st for our third Thursday program. It's a panel discussion called Dedicated, Who We Write For and Why, with, wait for it, Roger Reeves, Liz Garten-Scanlon, and Sasha West, 3 amazing writers who, if you want to hear anyone talk about why they write, you want to hear these 3 people do it. So I hope you'll come back on Thursday, March 21st and enjoy that program as well. There's information on our table over here. But that's not why we're here tonight, guys. We're here for Amanda Churchill, and we're here for a program that we call WLT on the Craft of Writing, which is something we do a few times a year when we have the opportunity. We love to do it in a bookstore with an author who has a new book out, and take an opportunity to talk to someone we admire about the craft of writing, and also a little bit about their journey to publication. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to have a great conversation. Amanda's going to read a few things from her beautiful novel. We're going to give you all the opportunity to ask some questions. You're going to buy some books, and then Amanda's going to sign those books, and it's going to be pretty much the best night of your Friday ever. The best Friday night you've ever had. So who's ready? You guys ready? Let's get to it. Okay. First, I'm going to read the official bio, and then we'll get into it. Amanda Churchill is a writer living in Texas, which is very vague. Her work has been featured in Hobart Pulp, Witness, River Styx, and other outlets. She was a Writers League of Texas 2021 Fellow and holds a Master of Arts in Creative Writing from the University of North Texas. The Turtle House is her first novel. Please welcome Amanda Churchill.
I think that's like really hard. That's going to be hard to live up to.
We're going to do it.
Okay.
How are you this evening?
I'm good. It's nice to be back in Austin, and the drive was easy, and I basically quickly found my hotel, so I'm good.
Wow.
Yeah.
The drive was easy. No one has ever said that
The
about
drive was
I-35.
I know. Well, Mopac was kind of great, but other than that, it was wonderful.
All right. Well, We're not going to talk about traffic again tonight.
That's
That's
right.
the only time.
That's our promise.
So this novel that you have written, The Turtle House, this beautiful, beautiful novel, I want to start the conversation with this quote from Melissa Hua. Like a bespoke building, there is nothing extraneous or without purpose in this beautifully executed debut, evoking with tender detail the stories of Miniko and Leah, grandmother and granddaughter. The novel draws a line connecting the contrasting worlds of pre-war Japan to late 1990s Texas. Broad in scope, yet intimate in storytelling, The Turtle House asks what it is to build a home and what it is to carry a home within. Pretty nice.
She did a good job on that.
So with that in mind, could you, first, we're going to have you read a little bit to just set the scene for us. Very close to the beginning of the book, an inciting, no pun intended, incident.
Yes.
So go ahead and read a little snippet, and then we're going to jump in.
Okay. Now, ooh, I always forget the glasses. These are brand new. I've just started wearing them like 3 weeks ago because I realized I woke up one morning I couldn't see anymore when I looked down. And so, yeah, I mean, like right before my book published, I was like, that's nice of you, Mother Nature. Thank you.
They look great. You look like an author.
That's the other goal.
Yeah.
Always look a little smarter than one actually is the other goal. All right, so this is from chapter 3 of my novel. Starts in Curtin, Texas on March 2nd, 1999. The night my grandmother's house burned down, we could see and smell the fire from the highway. It had burned like its shape, a collection of squares, a big square in the middle, 2 smaller squares, one at either side. My dad parked and we ran to where Minnie stood under the pecan tree that my great-great-grandfather had planted, its curvy arms reaching to the flames. The fire replicated in her oversized glasses, her face and silver hair reflecting the orange blaze. My great-aunt Dimple and great-uncle Calvin were already there. Dimple had seen the fire from her kitchen window, just a burning dot on her horizon, and had called 911, which had dispatched the volunteer fire department. If my hip hadn't hurt tonight, I wouldn't have been up for my pain pills, she had said. Dimple's arthritic hip was a constant source of consternation, caused originally by a fall from a hayloft when she was a teen. Thank God for that accident so long ago, or I would have lost my Minnie. This is a thing in our family, thanking the heavens for past pain. I don't know where this concept comes from. Minnie certainly doesn't ever say anything like this. She doesn't willingly say much about her past at all, and when she does, she doesn't cut it to pieces and hold it up to see how it was cooked. This, she has insisted many times, is an American thing. And she also insists, is not an American. Oh, yes, you are, my mother will always respond. I've seen the photos from the day you got your citizenship. My grandmother will then give her the stare, the straight at your eyes, slightly ajar mouth, about to say something insanely hurtful, but stopping because the receiver is weak and will not be able to withstand judgment. I wish I could get away with such a death stare. A classic Minnie move. She did it the night of the fire, when the new sheriff's deputy questioned her about how the blaze began, how she escaped without a smudge of soot, and why she was carrying a bowling ball bag. To his questions, she was short and sharp, like a dagger. My mother and father are now recalling this night over oatmeal in the kitchen. They are having a conversation in hushed tones about what is next. Last night, getting a call from the neighbor that my mother-in-law is on the roof again, my mother says. It's the straw that broke the camel's back. My father says, I know, it's dangerous. Yet I'm certain the break-your-neck aspect is not what broke my mother's camel's back. But you don't, she says. You go to work and I'm stuck with her, unless Leah is home to entertain, and Leah, she's just so... My mother emits a long, drawn-out sigh that ends in a little sneeze from her spring allergies. It's not that Mom and Minnie openly argue, but it's a matter of boundaries. My mother likes to control hers. My grandmother does as well. My mother is from a good Fort Worth family with firm beliefs on how things are done. My grandmother, I see now, is from a good Cadoman family with equally firm ideals. They are alike because of this. But to ever mutter such a sentiment would be mutinous. and Daddy is in the center of these two quietly conflicting countries, both wanting him like he's a landlocked valley with considerable natural resources. It's their great love of this man that helps to keep our family so ridiculously close-knit. It is also why my grandmother has now overstayed her welcome.
Thank you. So that sets us up and it introduces, you're reading there from the point of view of Leah, and then, of course, the book turns out to alternate between these 2 points of views, Leah and her grandmother, Minnie. And so it's a grandmother story and a granddaughter story, and you talk in the acknowledgments about interviewing your own grandmother in 2009. You mentioned that you interviewed her over snacks, smokes, and soap operas, which is very similar to these two characters in the book and how they start to share their stories. But you say that the historical aspects of the novel are inspired by your grandmother, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, and also when or how you knew that inspiration was going to result in a novel.
Well, yeah, I went to interview my grandmother at kind of a turning point in both of our lives. My grandmother had been diagnosed with stomach cancer, had gone through a major surgery where they actually removed her stomach, and she was recovering. This can be done, and you're not supposed to live very long without a stomach, maybe a couple of years. She lived 8, so that's just a little bit about my grandmother. And I was pregnant with my very first child, and not like a little bit pregnant, but like bowling ball belly pregnant. So we were not doing a lot in our lives. I was kind of nesting and finishing up my thesis, and my grandmother was trying to figure out what to do with her own mortality. And so when I started asking her questions, she was very reluctant to answer some of them, but then she'd kind of get into it, and she would kind of lean in and tell me a few things, then she'd kind of clam up again, and she'd flip on the TV and light a cigarette and just kind of start being super quiet and just ignore me, like I was not even in the room anymore. And I would just sit there and wait. 1, I was really tired and felt like getting up off the floor again, and 2, I wanted to know what happened next. So that went on for about 3 months, and I got a lot of wonderful details. Now, this novel has a lot of the stories in there, but when I was asking questions, I wasn't the best journalist ever. There were big chunks that I forgot to ask, and I realized this when I started writing them down in 2014 after she had passed away. And it was like I was walking down a sidewalk, and I'd come to a huge hole, and I would have to figure out how to bridge that gap, how to write through it. And so that's where the fiction came from, and the historical part. It was a fun process, but also very challenging. It kind of kept my grandmother alive for me even after she passed. So.
And so you started it as a way to connect with your grandmother, and then over time you sort of came back to it and realized there was a novel there.
Yeah, and my grandmother also, because I was getting that master's in creative writing, she had been thinking, I think, on her own, sitting there in her chair at night thinking, I wonder what I could do with this kid. And when I was leaving one afternoon, kind of towards the end of our interview time, and I was like 9 months pregnant, I went back in because she had yelled my name, and she looked at me, and she was the kind of woman that would brag about anything, and not even like brag, but like something that was really good about her, she would just like really talk about it, like her hair. Everyone say I had the thickest hair, and everyone they know, that kind of stuff. And so she looked at me that day and was like, my stories, Mandy, I think they make real good novel one day. And I was like, seriously? You called me back in here for this? And she was like, oh no, I think you're good. I think people like it. And so I just kind of like, was like, oh my gosh. And so we went on, life went on. And after she passed, I took out those stories I'd written down. I just missed her. I had a new baby at home. My newborn was colicky. I was up all kinds of crazy hours. I was not sleeping at all, and kind of in that weird haze of early motherhood where you just don't know what you're doing. And I started writing them down, and I heard her voice as I was doing this going, this make good novel. And I was like, I don't know, maybe a linked story collection, Grandmommy. And she's like, kept on saying it was a novel, so that's how it ended up.
Well, and you also then decided to have 2 threads, right? So you have two stories, one set in the late 90s, as we said, in this small town in Texas, and then Mineko's story, which really takes us from the pre-war 1940s into the present day, the 1990s. So where did Leah come from? How did you decide that this novel needed that second thread, and how did you figure out exactly what that second thread was going to be?
I always felt that for me to write as my grandmother first person, it felt almost disrespectful to me. I don't know why. She was my grandmother. These are her stories. But if you had known my grandmother, she was kind of an intimidating person, and I was Sarah knew my grandmother, and so I was a little concerned about writing as her, and also because of the cultural differences and what I knew about her, and I knew how readers would see a Japanese character. I felt like there needed to be like a person who could stand in both cultures and maybe just kind of explain in both directions, and that became Leah. And at first, she was just her grandmother's helper, and then her story took over, and I could see the similarities between the two and how they both need each other so much, and kind of like how I needed my grandmother at that moment in time in 2009, and it just kind of took off from there.
And I was going to ask this question a little later, but to talk about the craft of it, how did you write those two narratives? Did you find yourself staying with one of them for a while? Did you truly alternate back and forth when you reached a stopping point with one story? What was the way of getting that down on the page?
Well, the first narrative, the historical one, I started, like I said, in 2014, and I wrote it by hand, and I went straight out. That one has actually changed very little through the whole publishing process. That was as it was. And the second part didn't come around until more like late 2018, early 2019. And that's when I started weaving in a Leah story here and there. And I would kind of chop up the historical spot and put in a Leah spot, and then go back to historical, and then kind of, chop it up a little bit and wedge in another Leah part. And then that became the process.
Right, and figuring out exactly where those pieces went. So Leah, in many ways, her story is standing still. She's kind of stuck in this in-between place emotionally, geographically, truly. She's back at her parents' home in the town that she grew up in after coming to Austin and starting what she thought was going to be this wonderful life as an architect, right? Now has come back home. But Mineko's story really does travel. So we start with her in her childhood village in Japan. We go to the city, we go to an American base, and then we come to Texas. And I wanted to first ask you, before we talk a little bit about setting, to read from chapter 4. There's a really lovely section from her childhood, I would say.
Thank you. All right. So chapter 4, her village is called Kadoma, and this is May 1943. The river was wider than Mineko had thought. From the bridge and shore, it had looked easy, swimming from one side to the other. It was cold mountain runoff, and it was barely summer. Village boys, those who still had not reached the age to fight in Manchukuo and in the islands, cheered her from the side. She could hear them when she flipped her head to breathe. Fumiko stood on the bridge, holding Mineko's robe. Mineko knew her beautiful younger sister, Hisako, had hurried home just before she dove in, gone to tell on her, to make the evening hard. Hana would tell Hiroshi, Mineko sitting quietly across from her, that their 17-year-old daughter was an ugly, rebellious disappointment. Hiroshi would just eat his dinner, sad eyes on her only when her mother turned to pour the tea. Years of war and life with Hana had worn him down. Mineko was cutting through the water with precision, her legs and arms synchronized, lungs burning. The boy she was racing, 2 years younger, had stopped and turned around when the current picked up toward the middle. They had tossed reeds in from the bridge to see if the center waters were running faster, but it had appeared safe, or, if not that, possible, just a little faster, nothing that young arms and legs couldn't tame. But the current was pulling her. She knew if she could get through it, just another 40 meters, the water would calm, and it would be a remarkable finish. The first girl to swim across. Mineko's arms tired before her legs, and like that she was suddenly disorganized, her breathing off, gasping. She tried to keep kicking, but Mineko began to sink. Her legs stopped thrashing on top and instead began to pedal below, her face still above the water, her head back. She could see the sky, the brightest blue. A heron swooped and dipped overhead. Mineko's mind sharpened to the water around her. She watched the heron. When it flies out of sight, I'll swim again. The heron disappeared, and Mineko's feet kicked in the numbing cold below. She grabbed the deepest breath that she could and aimed her torso down, diving, and felt as if she were swimming through the icy water that cooled the soba noodles for summer dinners. Yet she pushed and broke free, cutting through the depths, and then swam up, bursting through to the sun, gulping fresh air. She had swum below the current. Mineko heard the wind-carried cheers behind her. Floppy-armed and tired, she kept going until it was shallow enough to stand, her feet resting too heavily on the sharp rocks, the water a little lower than her waist. Mineko made her way to the bank and the pebbled sand of the edge. Then she climbed the steep slope, legs shaking, teeth set into a smile, chattering. There was sweet Kadoma, garden homes and meandering paths, the big bathhouse with its majestic roof, the red-topped shrine where the old monks scattered kids like pigeons, the mochi man's cart smelling of burnt sugar and toasted rice. Somewhere, down below, was her mother, a woman made small by Mineko's vantage point, and she liked this idea. A miniature mother, her miserable voice just a squeaking mouse. Mineko then focused her attention on the children on the other side. A few had wandered off, but most were there. She waved. A few whooped and cheered. Fumika was making her way carefully down the bank with Mineko's robe, a wide smile on her face. Mineko turned to the water again, and across from her, toward Manikoma, perched high, hidden on a cliff, was Mineko's favorite place in the world, the stately Kominka that loomed like a loving mother, watching from afar. Mineko thought she might float.
Thank you. I love that passage so much because it says so much about Mineko. It talks about her strength, it shows you her determination, and she goes through heartbreaking things after that, and all, for many years of her life, she's dealing with a lot of really tough stuff. And for her to still have at the end of the book, I think it's not a spoiler to say you see that same girl who swam across that river that day. It's just really beautifully done. But I also love that passage because of the setting, because of the way that you drop us into that place, both at that river, but also when you talk about the town, and then when she looks out and sees the turtle house that she loves so much. So can you talk a little bit about how you approached the setting in this novel, and especially in those early years for Mineko in Japan?
Well, that was a challenge. I have never actually been to Japan. We were supposed to go, but a big pandemic kind of ruined our party. And so everything I have is my grandmother's photos, her recollections. I printed out a map and tile printed it and then taped it together and took it over to her house when we were talking. And of course she was like, "Oh, this is not good map, this is too new." And I was like, "Oh, did the best I could." But I know the setting through someone else's eyes, and then it was my job to go through and just do a ton of research and kind of make sure I knew the lay of the land. Like literally, I drew maps. I did everything I could. I'm a graphic designer by trade, and so there were little pictures of houses where I thought they should be, along the river where I thought they should be, and so the setting was a lot of labor and a lot of love that went into it. And I think what helped the most though were my grandmother's some photos. And you look at photos and you see a lot of people just see the people in the front, but I was always staring to the back, and I'd scan them in and then blow them up to see what was behind them so I could tell. I was like, okay, what kind of tree is that? Okay, if that's what kind of tree is that, then I would double check it. I went deep diving all through that area of Osaka. So.
And there is a lot of confidence in the way that you write setting that does come probably from that research that you did, and it does seem like you did a lot of great research for this book. How did you know when to set the research aside, or how did you handle not letting the research overtake the story?
That was a challenge. Sometimes I would get so into it that I would struggle writing it, which I think is pretty normal. I was at one story, a conference in New York, in Brooklyn, and one of the writers there said that she approached research like a vampire, and that she would find where she needed to be and then get vampiric about it. And I was like, what does that mean? She's like, just suck everything out of it and then move on. And I was like, wow, that's really, but the image stayed with me. So I would write along, keep on going, go, okay, I need to know everything about tile roofs right now. I've got 25 minutes, and try to pull as much as I could and write it, and then go back and make sure the research was correct, edit anything that needed to be edited. If the color wasn't quite right, change it that way. So I could just keep moving in a forward direction as opposed to stopping and just kind of going down rabbit holes and then never coming back up.
Vampire. I like it. The book is called The Turtle House. So before we move away from Japan, and we're going to come to Texas with Minako in a moment, what can you tell us about the Turtle House? Did this place exist somewhere and you found it? Was it something from your grandmother's stories? Where did it come from? Because it is a magical, special place in this book, and it means so much to her from her past, and then also means so much to the later story with Leah.
Well, I wish it were a real place. There are a lot of kuminkas in Japan. There are a lot of old country homes and farm homes that have been abandoned because, just like here, a lot of people leave their small towns and go to the big cities. And so people are actually coming back in. A lot of Brits, some Americans are buying them up and restoring them to their former glory, much to the chagrin of the people who actually live there. But I watched a lot of videos about this and saw a lot of pictures. My grandmother did have a beautiful home. I have one photo of it, and it was the official station master's home in her village. It's passed from station master that my grandfather was. He was in charge of the trains there. And so I had that picture. My dad is also in construction. So my dad has built every single house I've ever lived in, save for one. And right before I started on this, I had moved into the home that I live in now with my kids and my husband. My dad had built it. We had lived in a 1919 house in Fort Worth that was the money pit. Every time I fixed something would break. And I had a baby, and Dad was like, you know what? I think we could buy some land and build you a house that looks old and then have new plumbing and new electrical. And I was like, sold. And so I had done this with him. I had driven all over, picking out marble and hinges and doors, and been there every day during construction. And it just kind of seeped in that I knew there needed to be a house in my novel. And as far as turtles are concerned, my grandmother was a huge turtle lover. They do mean good luck and like long life. My grandmother would rescue them from the country roads near her house. She would put on these long yellow dishwashing gloves, and she'd pull her car to the side and jump out and run to the middle, pick up the turtle, see which way it was heading, and then take it there. Because she was always afraid that she's like, oh, some of these boys in their big trucks come kill them on purpose. And she was like against that totally. And my dad hated this because often she would have my sister and I in the car, and it was very dangerous. And she's like, oh no, Pat, I not do that. She totally 100% did it. I watched her a million times. My life could have been lost many, many times. But the turtles were all safe.
They're good luck.
They're good luck. You can't hurt them. And so because of her love and because of this, I see them everywhere. Because of my grandmother, I'd see a turtle and go and just immediately think about her, which is kind of nice. So
you knew.
I knew.
There were turtles.
Had be turtles, yeah.
So then let's go, let's leave Japan with Minako and hear one more passage from the book, because of course we can't have you do a reading in Texas without reading a little bit about the piece of the novel that is Texas. So if you'll indulge us one more time.
I will gladly. Okay, this is chapter 20. This is Curtin, Texas, July 3rd, 1953. Ghost white. Not a warm white, but a whiteness where the gray, weathered boards could be seen just below the surface. It was 2 hours past death, and that's what Minako thought, staring at the farmhouse for the first time. They were parked at the end of the gravel drive. They had driven all night. May was asleep in the middle and slumped on her lap, Polly asleep in her arms. She had been hot for hours, stifling in a cardigan, but since both were sleeping peacefully, she had not moved to take it off. So she sat there, James pointing out the landmarks of the ranch, sweat in her hair and between her breasts and running down her stomach, her eyes taking in the white house and the flatness, a sickness in her throat. It wasn't that the land was ugly, she decided. It had a starkness that was interesting. The lack of elevation was jarring. She had never seen any place so level for so far a distance before. The grasses grew tall and swayed in a slight breeze. There were trees along the fence line and up around the house. "Pecans, a whole grove of them," James had kept saying, and she didn't know exactly what this meant until he said it was a nut tree, and she nodded with some understanding. And where the land turned greener and small bushes and trees sprung up, that was the creek, Curtain Creek, and he said she could look at that later, but it had good fishing and a swimming hole. Mineko felt a wave of thankfulness wash over her. But there were snakes, water moccasins. So it was always best to bring a shotgun with you, just in case. Mineko's heart sank a little. Yet to swim, maybe killing a snake wouldn't be too awful. But the house. As they drove closer, Mineko could see that it was nothing more than a tall box of a place with two sides that jutted out. It was perfectly congruent other than that. Windows, a long rectangular porch on the front. The brackets that held up the roof of the porch were barely decorative. And, like everything else, the trim, the lattice that hid the underbelly of the home, the pillars, white. "Needs repainting," James said. "You can help do that this fall." "We choose the color?" "I choose the color." "Oh." They parked under the shade of one of the pecans. James opened his truck door, bounded out, and left Mineko and the children in the cab. He walked up onto the porch, pushed against the post to see if they shifted, stomped his feet to check for rot, looked up. What is he looking for, Mineko thought. It wasn't until later that week, when May was stung by a wasp, that she figured it out. James peeked into the windows. Mineko couldn't see his face. He didn't turn around, nor did she expect him to. Maybe he was happy now, home at last. She hoped he was, but it was a thin want, the long wisp of a spider's web. She buried her nose in the top of Polly's head. They all smelled of their own flavor of sweat. Hers like heavily pickled daikon. May's was peppery, and Polly, with only milk in his belly still, was a sweet sourness. They all needed a long bath and clean clothes. She desired nothing more than quiet and a moment's peace to take in her new surroundings. If she could just be still, no boat tossing her, no truck bumping her, and have some silence to think. Yes, she could figure it out. James went into the house, no key needed, closed the door behind him. Mineko looked at May, still asleep, her bangs stick straight and stuck to her face. Polly was hot in his sleep against her. Should she go in? Should she wait to be invited? As she was trying to figure out her next steps, another truck came down the drive in a cloud of white dust. This truck parked a good distance away. A man with the same thin shoulders as James, the same square jawline, but with a smile, a true smile, got out. A woman with blonde corkscrew curls tied up in a bandana, short and curvy with a light bouncy step, was gesticulating to him. Mineko watched her climb onto the porch, mint green short pants and a sleeveless peach top. She turned and looked back at Mineko in the truck and, surprised to see someone, hit her companion with the back of her hand and pointed. Mineko could tell they were married. But then they, too, went inside. Mineko opened the truck door, expecting to feel some sort of breeze, but it was equally hot and still outside. She carefully awoke May by shaking her lightly and then pushing her to sitting. May opened her eyes and blinked, mouth a little agape, dried saliva on her chin. Mineko retied the bows at the ends of her braids and slid out of the truck, holding Polly. Clutching May's hand, and with Polly now gurgling on her shoulder, she walked up to her new home. "This is where we live now, May," she said in Japanese. May nodded.
Thank you. Welcome to Texas. So let's talk about Curtin, Texas. This is not an actual town.
No, it's like a hodgepodge of towns.
Tell us about that. Tell us about writing a place that feels very real. I'm imagining comes from your own, perhaps, knowledge, history, but is not actually that place.
There are a cluster of towns heading up to Denton, Texas. Just a whole bunch of them on one side of the railroad tracks. And so my grandmother lived in one called Ponder. I grew up in one called Roanoke. And so I just went through and picked up all these towns that I had driven through all my life and just kind of stuck them in a pot and mixed them together. Because I wanted that small town feel, the one that I remember growing up from the 80s and 90s. the one gas station and the no lights in the town, and the railroad, the train that went through 3 times a day. So it was just a combo.
Well, when you do that, you get to pick and choose the things that you
like the most. Yeah.
and then get rid of the rest. And do you have a lot of people coming up who are sure that Curtin is their town?
A lot of people from Crum, Texas think it's Crum, which is
Why is that?
I don't know. I think there's Crum people just think they just want to be there. They just want. They don't have any. They're not
Crum people.
I mean, their town's name is Crum. I mean, for God's sake, bless
I've
their
been
hearts.
to Crum. I've been to the library there. It's lovely.
It's a lovely library. Yeah,
Mhm.
it was not as lovely in '86. So. Yeah.
So let's talk about the writing, publishing side of this. Let's talk about the process of finishing this novel. And can you, just for the writers in the room, I'm guessing many of them will be curious about your journey. When did you know you were done?
Well, I mean, when
Do
they
you
came,
know
in,
that
when
you're
they
done
came
now?
in a box and I opened the box and they were there, I was like, I guess we're done with this, huh? No turning back now. I officially finished the very first full draft of both Leah and Mineko's stories in December of 2019. I had gone to a conference the summer before, met a friend who was actually on the same chapter of her novel that she was writing, and we did a pinky swear, and we started going. We're like, we're gonna be done by the time January happens. And so we would write, and every afternoon we would check in on each other, and we kept pace. So if you look at her novel and my novel, they have about the same number of chapters. It's because that's how we did it. Her novel is called A History of Burning. Janika Oza, beautiful book. Then the pandemic happened, and Janika kept writing because she didn't have kids at home. I stopped writing because I became a homeschool teacher suddenly. And so then everything kind of changed for me again. I knew that I wanted to revise, and I didn't have the time. So that kind of paused me, and then I started up again.
And so what was the revision process like for you?
It was revising that Leah story. I had written an original story that it was kind of silly. It was just a silly story, and it didn't have the depth that I really wanted, but I wanted to get it done, so I just kept on going with the silly story until December 1st. And then I started really looking at it and thinking about what I needed, and started rewriting it from there. So that would have been 2020 throughout the entire year, and then kind of did a half revise on that as well. And by that time, it was 2021. I'm trying to get all my dates straight.
That's okay. No one's going to fact check you here.
I know.
Yeah.
But yes, signed with my agent in October of 21.
And so can you tell us a little bit about that process of finding an agent?
That was, I was terrified. I was terrified to do it. I had luckily been to a lot of conferences over the years, and it was kind of my gig. I would go for a week. I would apply in the spring, and then go for a week to wherever accepted me and whatever I could afford, and then meet agents, meet people, work really hard for that week, and then come back home and kind of start my whole process over again for the year. And so I had a list of agents that I really liked, and then my friend Janika had met Sarah Boland, my agent. And so I had this list plus Sarah Boland's name because Janika said she'd be awesome, and that's who I sent out to. So there was 10 names on that list, and I want to say I had 7 meetings, but when I met Sarah on Zoom, I just knew that she was the one for me. She's lovely. I just knew it.
Coming to our conference this summer.
Coming to our conference this summer, yes.
So what about the actual publishing side of it in terms of the book itself? I guess what I'm wondering is, what would you say to Amanda, who was just finishing that first draft, go back in time, about what you've gone through in terms of from then to now? What advice would you give to that Amanda with all of the knowledge you have now, putting out your first book, which is a triumph and which is getting amazing reviews and a lot of great attention, but what piece of advice would you give?
I worried a lot. I mean, like a lot, to the point that I was not sleeping at night. So I think I would have told myself just to kind of let it all happen. As soon as something good would happen, I would go, okay, that was great, and push it away, and then start worrying about the next thing, as opposed to like living in the moment and celebrating the little bitty wins, because, well, that's just who I am, and it wasn't a bright move. And then there was a lot of moments when it's about to come out, like 3 months towards publication, and I get on Twitter, and everyone's getting something. Everyone's getting some list, some mention, something, and it was crickets, like nothing. I would kept on refreshing my email and like hoping for anything, like someone asked, maybe my publicist forgot my email address, or I mean, I was concerned, and I was like, oh my gosh, you fretted away all that time when good things were happening, and now you're just sitting here just twiddling your thumbs. You should have been happier back, a year ago, 6 months ago. So
You look pretty happy now.
I'm happy now. It's good. It ended up okay.
I want to turn it to the audience and see. We have a few minutes if anyone has any questions for Amanda. I've still got a lot, but I want to make sure we have time. Anyone have a question? Oh, come on. Yeah.
So I'm about halfway through the book, and it's so great and wonderful. And what I've noticed is the historical part is so very much alive, and the narrative's like it's connected, but also has like different styles. I almost want to say it's like I kind of like skimmed to the acknowledgments, and I read that you did research, but were there like literary influences that you had when writing like the historical versus also even for the contemporary setting, or not so contemporary these days?
I know. I pretend it's contemporary 1990s, but we all know that was a while ago.
It's
right?
historical.
Yeah, it's historical officially. Hate that.
Yeah, what were your literary influences?
Oh gosh, I cannot. Minjin Lee's Pachinko is one of my favorite novels of all time, and I love it, love it, love it. I also love Olive Kitteridge, and so when I was starting the planning of this, kind of in my head, like, all right, I think I've got a story here. What could it be like? And I was like, Olive Kitteridge, but Japanese. And so it was like I love that grumpy, kind of hard to love protagonist, and I just love the epic of like moving through place and time and knowing characters at different ages. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's true, there is a different sort of feeling to each of those. I think you did that really nicely, that it never felt jarring to go from the historical to the 1990s, but yet there was a distinct voice or tone in those two different threads.
Yeah, I think changing point of view was really important to me, like going from third, where I had kind of a bigger view, and then going into Leah's first person helped me know that I was in a different place, and to change my word choice and how I structured my sentences, and kind of as a reminder that I was in a different time.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So in the book, Minnie has a long lost love, right? Did your grandmother happen?
So the question is, did your grandmother have a long lost love? In the book, there is a long lost love that Minnie has.
Yes, she did have a long lost love. When I interviewed her in '09, she mentioned him, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, I had a boyfriend, loved him lots, he did. And it was like, just skimmed on over, and I was like, I took notes. I was like, well, what's his name? She gave me his name. I was like, all right, well, thanks, thanks for that little nothing. And I just forgot about it. And then she was in an assisted living. She was very ill. She was on hospice care so many times, though. She would like pop back up out of hospice, and we'd walk in the room thinking it was like almost the end, and she'd wake up and like demand like a cigarette and like a shake from Sonic. Like it was crazy. But then towards the end, she really was finally passing away, and she told my dad and my aunt that she wanted to be cremated, and she wanted to be cremated with a certain photo. And she said, go, it's in that drawer over there, go find it. And so my dad and aunt were like, cool, whatever. They really thought it was of them. And that's the funny thing. They thought the photo was like of them when they were kids, like, oh, our mom loved us so much, she wants to be cremated with a photo of us. And the night that she passed, Dad went over there and dug around in the underwear drawer, because that's where we keep things we love, I guess, and it's the underwear drawer, and found it, and it was a picture of this boy that she had loved. And that's what she wanted to be cremated with. And so my mom from the hallway calls me, and she's like, oh my gosh, you will not believe what your daddy just found. And I was like, Mom, take a photo of it, take a photo. So my mom, who's not good with technology, gets that phone out, and I have the blurriest photos of a photo that you could ever have. But yes, she was cremated with it. She adored him, and that was what she remembered her entire life. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I haven't read your book yet, but I really want to. But writing about your grandmother, do you feel closer to her after she passed away with the
Yeah, I mean, I always felt closer to her. I was one of the grandkids that she was closer to in some ways. But after she passed, I would go in and start writing, and I swear sometimes I could smell her nearby. She smelled like cigarettes and like soy sauce and like cold coffee, like this weird combination that no one else would love, but I love the scent of it, and I would smell it. So yeah, it's like I get to keep her around, and then also now other people know about her, and it's like she always wanted to live forever, and I think I've given her her wish. Like she's really gotten it. So
She might need a sequel.
I mean, Mineko, the sequel.
Any other questions? We have time for probably one more. Yes, back there.
How did you keep yourself encouraged, like, to finish the novel? Because I imagine that when you first started writing it, maybe you felt very differently from when you got towards the end or when you met that friend that kept your accountability buddy. But, like, did you ever feel, like, overwhelmed or, like, this is too daunting? What if I set myself up to do and, like, stay encouraged?
Yeah.
So how did you stay encouraged? I'm just repeating.
You know, there was one time, it was October of 2020. I felt like I was just never going to be able to write another thing ever. I had come to the end. I was just emotionally exhausted, and I'd go out and write. We have a trailer, a travel trailer, and that was my temporary office at the time. I'd go out there and turn on the air conditioner and start writing, and I would write the same sentence over and over again, and I would change like 3 words and delete it, and it went on forever. It went on for like 2 months, and finally, I took a class with Steve Almond a long time ago, and he said that if you're ever stuck, like throw something really random into the middle of whatever you're working on, and it might like loosen things a bit. So I started doing that. I just started throwing like just the most random experiences or ideas, or just I would go through the newspaper and go, okay, that's a weird news story. There was a tarantula loose, and I just threw it in the middle of the story to see what would happen. Well, eventually the tarantula got cut out of the story, but at least it got it moving again, and that movement made me feel like I wasn't, not all was lost. And so once I figured that out, it just kind of started chugging back to life again. But for 2 months, I mean, anyone who knows me, there was like sad text messages coming from me. Like, I am never going to do this again. I'm just going to be a graphic designer for the rest of my life, living in Keller, Texas. It was so sad. I was just,
Well, and you mentioned the conferences and things that you have attended, but when you look at the acknowledgments in your book, you really do, you do the work as a writer, and you meet other people, and you build community around you, and you seem to have a lot of writing groups or mentors as writers that I imagine have also kept you going. I think as a literary citizen, you've done an amazing job of that. Are there any tips that you would give to folks here who are looking to do something similar?
yeah, I think community that's been the thing for me. That's what's helped me the most. Being able to text someone and say, I am at wit's end, what should I do? And having someone reach back out across that void and just sit with you in your misery of not knowing what to do next, or your misery of being rejected in some way. And it was lovely. And I took a lot of time making friends over the summers, but then, you know, I was isolated in my town and everyone lived far away. So I discovered the Writers League of Texas before the pandemic, but then once it hit, I was like on Zoom all the time looking for the next thing that Becka would have. Like, I was looking just for Becka Oliver's face. And that really changed everything for me too, because it suddenly felt like, I was like, there's other people, and they're all over the state, and they're even in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I can make friends this way. And I like dove in. I went head first. So I would say, if you are struggling, get a group. Writers League of Texas is a great place to start. There's a lot of wonderful places throughout the state, but just for one that has a little bit of everything going on, it's my favorite.
And I'll give you $10 after
Thank
this.
you.
I was wondering when that would come.
It was coming.
I have to say, on a personal note, just as someone who has gotten to know you over the last several years, who considers you a friend, a colleague. Amanda serves on our board of directors, was one of our first group of fellows. All of them, I think, are here except for Jamirat and I. Raise your hand, fellows, who are Amanda's community. But to be now just such a fan of your writing. I mean, what a beautiful, beautiful book, and what an accomplishment. And on behalf of everyone here, I want to say congratulations, because it is wonderful. And we're glad to be here celebrating with you.
Thank you. That means so much.
So I want to say a big thank you to all of you for being here tonight. I know that Amanda would be happy to chat even more after we break up this fun party. I want to say a huge thank you to BookPeople again for being such an amazing bookstore and for giving us this space here tonight. I want to remind you that the best way you can support writers and indie bookstores is to buy books. So there's a big cart of books somewhere. I think it's downstairs, right? As you come in, you probably saw them. I would encourage you to pick up a copy, pick up a couple copies, pick up many copies of this beautiful novel, and Amanda will happily sign them over at that table right over there. And mostly, I just want to thank you all for being here, and I hope to see you again soon at the One Page Salon on March 21st or whenever it might be. So have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Congratulations.